When they decided to go on a hike, everything seemed harmless. Mark, John, and Sam were best friends since childhood, and often went camping to escape the city's hustle and bustle for a while. But this hike turned out to be unlike the others. None of them could have predicted that what was meant to be a peaceful retreat would soon become a struggle for survival. They ventured deeper into the forest, enjoying the silence, joking around as they always did. By evening, they found the perfect spot for a campsite, nestled between two tall pines, where the fresh air filled their lungs, and the warmth of the fire kept the chill at bay. Their plans for the night were simple: cook dinner, chat about life, and fall asleep to the sounds of the forest. But then, something disrupted their peace. A sharp crack of twigs echoed nearby, as if someone, or something, had stepped out of the undergrowth. Mark, sitting by the fire, froze, listening. At first they thought it might be an animal, but the sounds were too unnatural. Something heavy, deliberate, and close. They decided to investigate. When a dark figure emerged from between the trees, it first looked like a human. But as it drew nearer, the boundaries between man and machine began to blur. The creature moved like something alive, but there was something unsettlingly mechanical in its gait. It was a strange hybrid of man and machine. Its arms were too long, the joints bent at unnatural angles. Some parts of its skin were covered with metal plates that glimmered under the firelight, and its face, half human, half machine, seemed frozen in a grotesque, emotionless mask. Laser-like lights flickered from its mechanical eyes, and a distorted metallic rasp escaped from its throat, as if it was trying to speak, but couldn't. Mark took a step back, but suddenly, the creature bolted. It moved with unnatural speed, almost soundlessly. Before anyone could suggest returning to the camp, they, as if drawn by some inexplicable impulse, began to chase it. The creature dashed between the trees, leading them deeper into the forest. The air grew cold, and soon they found themselves standing before a hidden entrance, a metal door embedded into the hillside. It was almost invisible, overgrown with moss and roots, as though it had been abandoned for decades. But when the creature touched a panel on the wall, the door hissed open. Inside, a dimly lit corridor stretched out, the silence within broken only by the distant hum of machines and the faint echo of their own footsteps. They didn't realize the danger until it was too late. To their horror, they discovered rows of glass cells lining the corridor, each containing something that had once been human. But whatever humanity remained in those creatures had long been stripped away. They were grotesque victims of horrific experiments. Some had cybernetic limbs, others had metallic implants grafted into their bodies, and wires ran through their flesh like veins. The air was thick with the stench of chemicals and decay. One figure caught Mark's attention, a woman who was almost entirely mechanical. Only her head remained organic, her body encased in metal plating with wires and tubes running through her. She lay motionless in the cell, her hollow eyes staring into the distance, as if the life had been drained from her. But her eyes, they followed them, filled with pain and fear. "We need to get out of here," John whispered, tugging on Mark's sleeve, but Mark stood transfixed, as if hypnotized by the sight. And then, the footsteps, heavy, rhythmic, and drawing nearer. At the end of the hallway, several figures appeared. They wore white lab coats, their faces obscured by dark masks. Cold, emotionless, like the creatures they had created. One of them stepped forward, holding a tablet, studying the newcomers with a disturbing calmness. "You shouldn't have come here," one of the scientists said, his voice dry and devoid of emotion. "Now you'll become part of our experiments." The friends turned to flee, but it was already too late. The scientists pressed buttons on their devices, and the creature that had led them into the trap emerged from the shadows, its movements swift and precise. It grabbed John by the shoulder, its mechanical hand tightening with crushing force. He screamed, struggling, but there was no escape. "Run!" John yelled as the creature's clawed grip closed around his throat. Mark and Sam hesitated for a fraction of a second, but then instinct took over. They bolted down the corridor, dodging cables and scattered debris, the sound of John's struggle fading behind them. The labyrinthine halls of the facility seemed endless, twisting and turning, with no clear way out. Alarms blared, red lights flashing as metal doors slammed shut in their wake. As they ran, the walls seemed to close in on them. Each turn led to another dead end, or yet another row of cages, each housing more horrific creations. The once human subjects banged against the glass, their cybernetic limbs twitching in spasms as they wailed in agony. Mark felt his heart pounding in his chest, his legs burning as he pushed forward. Sam, struggling to keep up, stumbled but kept moving. Panic coursed through them as they dodged one closing door after another, narrowly escaping the grasp of the pursuing machines. Finally, a metallic staircase appeared before them, leading up to what seemed like a service hatch. With no time to hesitate, they sprinted towards it. The hatch was heavy, rusted, but with a collective shove, they forced it open. Cold air rushed in as they crawled out, collapsing onto the forest floor, gasping for breath. They didn't stop running until the lights of the laboratory disappeared in the distance, swallowed by the dark forest. They never looked back. 5 years passed. Mark and Sam could never forget that night. Every day they thought of John, wondering what had become of him. They had tried to find any trace of that place, but it was as if it had never existed. The laboratory was gone, wiped from reality. No one believed their story. So they remained silent, haunted by the memory, forced to live with the nightmares that never left them. Then one evening, they saw John again. It was late, in the small bar where they often met. He sat alone in the corner, head bowed. Sam froze as soon as he saw him. "Mark, is that John?" Sam whispered. Mark turned and stopped dead in his tracks. John looked different. His skin was pale, almost ghostly, and dark circles under his eyes made him seem as though he hadn't slept in years. But the most terrifying thing was his eyes. One of them had been replaced with a mechanical implant, glowing faintly red. His hands rested on the table and one of his fingers was metal, just like the creature that had led them into the forest. They cautiously approached him, their hearts racing. "John, is that really you?" Mark asked, his voice trembling. John slowly raised his gaze. His face was blank, emotionless. I've learned a lot," he said quietly, his voice carrying a faint mechanical tone. A cold shiver ran down Sam's spine. This was their friend, but something had changed. He was no longer the John they had once known. Something alien now lurked within him. John smiled faintly, but it was a smile devoid of warmth or humanity. They're still watching us, and soon they'll come for you too." Mark and Sam exchanged terrified glances. The man sitting before them was John, but only in appearance. Something else had taken root inside him, and soon they would discover what it was.